On this episode of A State of Control, we talk about software-defined AV. What is its impact on the way we do business, and what are the things that need to be concerning, as well as where are the benefits? All that and more on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A State of Control.
A State of Control, episode 67, Clouds on a Page.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by QSC, who invites you to go native with the QSYS audio, video, and control ecosystem.
Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the control, programming, and automation aspects of the AV industry. My name's Steve Greenblatt. I'm your host. Thanks for joining us today. So today's show, we're going to be talking about an interesting topic that, let's call it software-defined AV, how software has now impacted the physical components of AV systems. So with me to discuss this very intriguing topic is one familiar guest and somebody that's new to the show. So first, let me welcome my partner to of A State of Control. He is none other than Rich Fregosa. Welcome, Rich. How are you?
Mellow West Coast greetings. It's good. It's actually Friday, so this is working out great.
And we have a West Coast show for you today.
I'm telling you.
Next, he comes to us from the Pacific Northwest, another West Coaster, and he's an industry professional. He's none other than Nick Miller. How are you, Nick? Welcome back.
Doing well. Thanks for having me again, Steve and Rich.
Thanks for being here. And last but not least, somebody who's new to the show, but not new to AVNation or the industry. He comes to us from USC, and he also is the recently crowned 2019 AV Professional of AVNation. He's Joe Way. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here. So we've all seen the simplification of AV over the years, and we went from racks of equipment simply to displays and computer inputs. And it really is a consolidation and a new way of thinking to go from more of the hardware side of things to software solutions. And now they are very intriguing, but they also provide some means to sit back and think what impact do they have and how is that going to change the way we do things. So Rich, we're big fans of software here at A State of Control, and so I'm sure that this is something that we'll have a lot to talk about. But what impact does this software solution have just on the AV industry in general?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and pull out the old trick from radio. I'm going to use my self-edit button with this, but it is a mother bleeper. It's great in that we've been waiting for this forever. Starting out in the industry, and people who are new to the industry don't, I do feel like Grandpa Richie stepping in sometimes. So, back in my day, we used to solder things uphill in the snow, and when there was an issue, and when you were dealing with analog, and let's even take it back before digital. Let's take it back before HDMI. Let's take it back before even some of the digital video and digital audio transmission standards. When you're dealing with analog audio and video, you had a mechanical issue that typically was something that could be isolated and dealt with from a control standpoint. And you were in partnership with the integrator a lot more. So typically, if you were in the field, you've already written your code, you've already gotten everything checked out. And, for the most part, you're pretty sure the gazintas and the gazautas and everything is roughly going to do what you expect it to. By the time you get into the field and by the time you commission and you're working with a field engineer, with techs or, whoever happens to be there, you're basically troubleshooting physical connections, right? Did something get unplugged? Did something get plugged in the wrong place? Is something interfering with something else? I mean, these are time-honored troubleshooting techniques that were around for 50 years prior up until that point. Slide forward to digital transmission, HDMI, digital audio, however you want to send those signals. You then started kind of upping the ante. Did HDCP start getting in the way? Was it a copy protection issue? Was it an EDID issue that prevented the video from getting from one side to the other? You started dealing with, but again, you were dealing with something that was a bit more physical in nature. It was something that you could look at the unit, you could look at the display or the endpoint or anything else that you were talking to on the other side and say, oh, that's not right. That didn't exactly go the way that we expected. And a technician, somebody who was in the field trained to deal with audio video issues, would then be in partnership with you, and you kind of suss it out, and great, you get moving along. Fast forward to now. Now, for years and years, we'd gripe about it because, the technician would say if we can get rid of the programmers, life would be great, and the programmers are saying if we can get rid of the technicians, it would be great. We got our wish first. And it's kind of like the story of the monkey's paw, right? Be careful what you wish for. Once we started moving into a data-driven transmission line, system, we start getting on our own a little bit more, because now you can't look at somebody and say you hooked it up wrong, because they're saying, I plugged the network jack in. I'm good, Jack. I'm going to go grab lunch. I'll see you in a bit. Figure it out. Now we're dealing with a whole new set, a whole new team to work with, and that's IT. And now, whether you're working residentially, whether you're working commercially, whether you're working government, education, the odds escalate. Residential got a little bit more play. The integrator typically is the one handling the networking. They typically have somebody with the skill set to be able to work with you, and you can still kind of work in the traditional methods. You now start moving into education, government, corporate sector. You're dealing with an entire department. You're dealing with an entire group of people who, one, may not have the time for you because they're on 50 other things. Two, they don't necessarily understand what you're doing yet. So you have to train with them to start to work together. And the last thing is, from our side, I know me personally, there's a certain point where I get to networking, I'm way above my pay grade. Fast forward to now to AV over IP, that's significant. If you're not talking about IGMP, if you're not talking about layer 2 versus layer 3, if you're not talking about what does fast leave mean, I didn't know what it meant 3 years ago. All of these things now directly affect your ability to deploy your systems, because at the end of the day, it still says control system XYZ, and that's still what you're responsible for. So regardless of whether it isn't not my job, it's still a matter of getting it from there. So yeah, it's a mother bleeper at this point, and we're having to learn how to best work with new teams and increase again our level of expertise, because we need to be able to communicate where a problem is and to diagnose where a problem is and be able to say, hey, we're there from X to Z. So even before we get to the how does it do things, how do we get things transmitted, we're having to start all over and saying, is it transmitting? And that's been a challenge. I know for me, it's been a very steep uphill curve. I mean, we're starting to flatten it out a bit, but I think it's a challenge that a lot of control systems programmers are running into right now.
So Nick, you've been on several sides of this, throughout your career, and currently looking at things from a programmer standpoint, but also being able to appreciate from an end user or from an integrator standpoint. As Rich discussed, there's a lot more that goes into this. How do you go about directing traffic and sorting things out to be able to make a solution work? Because it also is about defining roles too, isn't it?
It is, and it's all about standards. And the fun thing about standards, as we all know, is there's so many to choose from. So really, for any particular project, picking a product alignment that uses similar approaches, similar standards, and staying as consistent as possible will lead to the most success. If you just start, I think that's where us as control system programmers and engineers will become more and more valuable, is being able to say, instead of just picking product off shelf A, shelf B, shelf C, being able to say, okay, these products really align with each other in how they operate, between codecs, transport layers, et cetera, et cetera. We're seeing that now with particular switch manufacturer A works very well with video over IP, this video over IP solution. Switch manufacturer B, or even a particular line or a particular model within the same manufacturer, doesn't work very well. So that's where it's really going to take a lot of communication throughout the industry, as well as just history and getting your hands dirty.
Joe, when it comes to looking at systems that you put in, you have a hand in designing them, I'm sure, and specifying them, but also having to maintain them. What are some of the criteria that you use, kind of talking to what Nick said, to be able to make those choices and know that the outcomes that you're going to get are what you're hoping for?
It's an interesting time because, even just starting with what Rich was saying with the, when you have all these boxes you're used to putting in and you can plug in the cables, you can find how to service that much easier, right? That's the biggest challenge you start to make, is where, how are you going to be able to understand where your issues are, making sure that the signal is flowing, figuring out which way you want to do it. On the other hand, I look at this as huge opportunities, right? At an enterprise level. So we have hundreds of rooms and I've got tons of student workers who have to go out into the field to service. Well, sometimes it was easier to just say, hey, it's this black box that you're going to unplug and plug back in. Well, that doesn't exist anymore, right? You've got encoder nodes and decoder nodes, and that's your room, right? And now the difference is, I also recognized I had 100 and some student workers who were also computer scientists. And I went, there's a huge opportunity here, because now as you start moving your services onto virtual servers or into the cloud, or as client applications running within a room of some sort, your ability to service just actually, I think, becomes easier if you can speak the language, because now you really don't need to leave your desk or your office to restart a room, to check a room, to see if signal is flowing, because you can just route it right to where you are, right? You can route it to speakers that are sitting next to you to make sure that it's working. You can, route the video to where you are to see that it comes through on your screen. There are so many things that you can do when you start, almost being an internal managed services provider, right? And that's really the change. Now, what does that mean when you're designing a system? Does it mean your line drawings are just a bunch of clouds on a picture on a page? Maybe. But I think that's really where it's exciting. And again, it comes back to, which ones are you going to pick? Are they stable? What happens when, your little NUC decides to do a reboot and now your services are gone? Who knows? There's still a lot to be figured out with that. Are we talking to our network team? I think it's ironic. A few years ago, I think I was definitely network stupid. And now I can actually have a genius, all right, I'll call it ingenious, an ingenious conversation for a AV person with my network team. I'll surprise myself every now and then when I throw out random, 4-letter, things and go, oh, I actually knew what that meant. But those are the conversations you have to have. And when we can join that conversation, things just get a lot easier. It's just different. And we all know that all the black boxes, we're just software running inside of somebody's black boxes. It just made us feel good to be able to plug in the cable and connect one box to another. It's still all the same stuff. It's just how we're going to manage it that has changed.
Nick, kind of carrying on what Joe just said, the fact that we need to learn to talk the IT language, and it may even be more than that, also understanding how IT is handled from a business perspective. What what are some steps that can be taken to get there? Because it is different, even though we feel like we've been playing in this world for some time.
It is. I really see this as kind of the second wave, or convergence 2.0, if you will. 10 years ago, our industry was wringing its hands quite a bit about AV and IT convergence. Is AV going to go away and get absorbed into the IT monster? And as we've seen, that hasn't happened. If anything, we as an industry have increased our position at the table and been able to improve the solutions that we deliver because of the gains that we've made on the IT side. This is really just the next wave of that. As Joe was saying, for a while now, many of our products have been boxes running software that you then just connect to another box running software. And to make the same point, it's just being consolidated into commodity hardware that's more reliable than what we've had before, more predictable, and more stable. If you look at the back, if you actually look at the owner's manual of any piece of gear you purchase today, and look in the back in the declarations and warranty and all that stuff, you'll see all the open source declarations that they have used inside any given product, and those lists are growing leaps and bounds. Of okay, we've used FFmpeg for our encoding, or 1,000 other examples, and that's really where how the products are made these days and will continue to be made. So understanding the tool sets that the manufacturers are using is really is the best way to stay ahead of it.
Rich, Joe made a comment that I really like, that and about the clouds on a page, right? And that's something that I think is kind of scary, right? Because from a programmer's perspective and from a third-party programmer's perspective, we were always relying on, this is your design, and kind of it gave you a little bit of a framework to say, okay, I know that the scope that I have to deliver goes within this design. Clouds on a page, that opens things up to a whole different set of rules. What do we do? How do we respond to that? And what's the right way of being able to handle it? Because we want to, of course, be accommodating, but this could open the door to some difficult situations.
It's interesting. I found that it changed my workflow a couple of years ago in terms of the documents that I create, or the documents that I present to the team as, based on projects before, here's something that we've come up with. Because you get your CAD drawing, from production, and sure enough, there is a giant cloud there, right? And sometimes I'd laugh, I kind of want to write the cloud, and just one thing on one side and one thing on the other, and just one giant cloud in between, because that's what it feels like half the time, right? Because you're like, how do you draw this? How do you connect this? And what's interesting is moving from the physical to the bit-based architecture of these systems. I found on our side, we wound up going a little bit old school, but with a new twist. In the old days, you'd have a spreadsheet, and you would have your inputs and your outputs, and you would just kind of put your check boxes next to them. With us, again, now that we are networked and we're communicating with the team, we have live documents that we create that sit inside our repository, that when we work with the networking team or with our team in the field, we're keeping a live list of IP addresses, port assignments, transmission packet types. Is it UDP? Is it TCP? All the little things that, when you're like, oh man, what's happening with this thing, that when you're working with a technician, and basically now you're giving them a laptop, and you're like, guys, is port 23 open? Guys, is port 2660 open? Are you sure that you didn't block us from getting to this point? And they go, yes, we checked. So now in our commissioning sheet, we sit there with a live document that's open on everybody's screens, and we just go tick, 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 tick. At the very least, if nothing else, they've got plausible deniability that some diligence is done. And so for me, that's where I found we had to shift again in terms of our documentation and our communication standards. The beauty of real-time communication and we've talked about this in other shows. I'm a huge proponent of, programs like Slack or if you're using Teams or, any flavor of communication software that you want that's project-based. I think it now is an integral tool in a programmer's toolkit. I think if you're not using it, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. But for the sheer reason of, and I've always told this to novice programmers, I'm not worried about the programming I'm doing today. I'm not worried about the details that I know about the project today because I'm right in the middle of it and it's all, right there. Those synapses are still firing of, oh yeah, I can remember that over here you had this switch and that was over here and that wasn't connected. What I need something to chronicle when we come back 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years later and we look at this project and go, why did it happen that way? And you pull up these documents and you go, oh, and so in the, I'm going to date myself again, but in the early days of Crestron, there was an unwritten book. And the unwritten book had kind of the unwritten rules of how the processor worked and how the programming worked. And it was called the Book of Jeff. And when you didn't quite know what what was going on, that was always kind of the tome that you would go back to. And so we've taken, and really that's what I took it back to, is we for each project, we create that book, that touchstone that everybody can look back at and go, okay, pull this information, find this information, and not lose that information. Because again, drawings, if you don't, it's no different than your as-built, right? You can make the best laid out connection diagram ever. But if you make changes in the field and nobody makes it, and nobody notes it, but more importantly goes back and then reissues it and revisions it, you're almost at the point where like, why did you do it? And I think that is from the software-based world now, from the bit-based architecture, that even more so than ever, it's tough because programmers by a general rule were lazy, right? We try to do it faster, quicker, more efficient. You got to document. And so that's the big one for me, is that it's forcing me to be more disciplined in how I catalog and how I document a project in real time, because that has saved my butt so many times. Perfect example, I wired the house. I've got all kinds of stuff in here. When I switched over to, an IP, an AV over IP based system here at the house, I'm spending my money on switches now. I've got my hardware, but now what am I having to try out when I'm trying something new? I'm buying a new network switch because I'm wondering, how does this network switch work with the stuff that I have here? How does this network switch either have issues or doesn't? All of these, and so from a programmer's standpoint, you have a whole, when you're in development, you're not only having to consider your transmission and your receiving pieces, you're having to go, gosh, what about that piece in the middle? Does it, has somebody tested it? You hope it has, but have you tested it? Have you figured out where your gotchas are in there? So, it's frustrating and fun all at the same time, because like Nick said, it is convergence is real. It's real. Yeah. We've been talking about it forever. So.
I want to tack onto that, because with your way you're documenting, we also have to recognize that we need to document the software versions that we're using as well. So if you think that you're
That's
going
a great
to,
point.
and let's take, for example, I guess the big hit of ISC being IntelliMix Room, right? Now, if you're just sitting there thinking that you're drawing out a Dante system or something like that, or routing your audio, the key is you have to also note that it's not, and it's typical line drawing, you're drawing from, output 1 into input, whatever, right? And you can physically see that. Now you have to actually state that you're going into this software version 1.1 something, because down the road, when you pull this out, like you said, 2 years from now, well, when that software gets updated and that your system was designed based on a current version of a software offering. And so we have to now recognize that this is what it is that you're putting it into. You're putting it into, the Dante number, channel 17 or whatever they're doing, but also based on that current version. because that's what's going to bite us, I think. And if we want to talk about the fear of software-defined AV, it's what happens when the software changes. The boxes and the firmware only go so much, right? We can still get screwed up when someone updates their firmware, but it doesn't happen as much as literally a software going, hey, I'm completely redefining it. Now maybe those links don't link anymore. And what you completely designed a system based on just might not exist. Well, a physical port will never go away. A virtual port can, right? And I think that's an important note.
So following up on that, Joe, one of the questions I was going to have for you is, a lot of times we as programmers and especially independents, we're always questioned about, okay, when something goes wrong, how the client is saying, how are we going to get it fixed? And we don't want to have finger pointing. There's a lot of potential for that here. In your position, is there a way to be able to manage that? And do you have any thoughts on maybe how that's going to play out moving forward?
Yeah. My opinion is that as professionals in the AV industry, we're never well served to point the finger at anyone else, right? And even though we might be using IT's, infrastructure to move our data around, it's still our software. It's still our computers that it's loaded on. It's still our virtual servers, right? We may not be the ones who can spin it up or, necessarily access it or make those changes, but we're still putting our stuff in locations, and we still need to make sure that we take responsibility for that and treat it like it's an actual physical box, even though it might not be, right? Is it scary where you wonder, hey, if the network drops, and there's nothing we can do about it? I mean, there are certain limitations where, a physical cable is not going to drop, right? So we all love the analog world, especially I came from live sound. So I love, God love us a great digital console, but there's still nothing about being able to, physically grab the XLR cable and walk it all the way from point A to point B and find the failure point. Well, that's gone now. But we still have to now make sure that we're taking ownership of where ours is. Just because it goes on a virtual server doesn't mean we wash our hands of it and go, now it's somebody else's problem. Because we're still having to get into the settings of whatever that software is and make sure that, it's connecting in the way we would have expected it to connect if it were still a standard box. Right.
Nick, I'll throw this over to you. We talked a little bit about now these conversations that have to happen, and to Joe's point, we all have to work together. And Rich was saying, a lot more planning and communication has to go into this. Is this our inroads to having a bigger seat at the table as a programmer?
Absolutely. We joked about the line drawing with just a big cloud sitting in the middle. So we, as control system programmers, and by extension system design engineers, are the link to creating that cloud that's in the middle, creating defining the configuration of everything that goes in between, defining what software is running to manage these services. So absolutely, yeah. As control system programmers, there are sunny days ahead, as long as we stay on top of our game, stay educated, continue getting educated, and take our seat at the table. It's really it's being offered up on a silver platter at this point with software-defined AV coming about. It's really just a matter of being able to take control of it.
Rich, we'll wrap it up with you as we're getting close on time. The business is obviously changing. The mindset is changing. And as you said before, now you have to really learn. I mean, we've all kind of said networking is really where it's at. What are the ways to do that? What advice would you have to a programmer or even another industry professional to be able to build those chops and be successful in this new world that's going to be hitting us?
I'm going to cross promote you right here in this moment, and I'm going to say, get to know the technology managers. Spend your time developing your team and your your pool of professionals that you work with now more than ever. And again, I'm again, it's Resi is where I live. It's my happy place. And over the past few years, commercial, I found my fondness for it again. But we'll just set the Resi side apart, because that I think the rules still apply. I think that you still have to partner with network professionals. You need to, my feeling has always been, put yourself with a group of people where you're the dumbest guy in the room. That's always been my feeling, right? I want to be the dumbest guy in the room. I want to surround myself with smart, competent people that I can learn from. And I think that applies, pretty much universally. However, in commercial and in industrial education, all over, there are people, there are groups, there are teams, there are departments that have specific jobs and roles who can be that bridge for you. And so part of it, and even as the business owner of a programming company, or the programmer, the field person, learn the process, learn where to communicate, and it's what it's always been for programmers. And we've always said is, you've got to be open, you've got to be flexible. You've got to be willing to learn what everybody else is doing and adapt to what they need. Because honestly, that's what control system programming is anyway, right? It's not about us. It's not about putting our fingerprint on something. It is about, what does that user need? What is the fastest way and the most intuitive and efficient way to deliver? And then how do we adapt what we do to make it easier for them? You just apply it to people. You just apply it to those departments, especially now with the way that we're going, is that if you were used to just tapping alone on your laptop in a room and blasting your headphones to Norwegian death metal, good on you. But you got to start talking to people, and that's really the biggest bit of advice that I'd have, is that it's being a collaborating, being a team player, and learning and being empathetic to what these other guys are doing. I think is kind of that step in the direction that we should be looking at.
I think that's great advice for life in general. And that's why we do have a diverse panel, and why we try to bring in different voices onto the show. So thank you guys. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure something that we'll be revisiting in the future. I'd like to thank you guys for being here. Nick Miller, how can people get in touch with you and learn what you're up to?
Can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, pretty much any social media at Nick Mill.
And Joe Way from USC, thanks for being here. I hope this was a good first guest appearance, and we hope to have you back again. How can people get in touch with you? I know you also have your own podcast, as well as you're involved in an association of higher ed tech managers. So tell us about that.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on. Long-time listener, first-time caller here. So this was fantastic. So you can find me on all the social media at Josiah Way. And then also the Higher Ed AV podcast at Higher Ed AV, and Higher Ed Technology Managers Alliance. If you're in higher ed, love to have you come help us out. And that is HETMA at HETMA_org. So there's all of them.
Excellent. And Rich, last but not least, another great show. How can people get in touch with you, those that don't already know, and tell us what you're up to?
For a fireside chat with Uncle Richie, you can find me on the interwebs at rfregosa on Twitter. You can type my name into the interwebs, that shows up, Fregosa Design. First and foremost, though, I'd love for you to find me here at AVNation. We've got our suite of shows, obviously a State of Control, and we have many other shows that service the AV industry. So that would mean the most to me if you came and found us here.
And every time I hear you on Resi Week, it brings a smile to my face, and we're always cross-promoting, as you said. So thanks, everyone. My name is Steve Greenblatt. You can reach me, my company, Control Concepts, at controlconcepts.net, or on social simply at Steve Greenblatt. But as Rich said, most importantly, visit avnation.tv to learn more about this show and all the other shows on the network, as well as coverage of the events in the industry, such as what recently passed ISE as well as upcoming Infocom and many others. While you're at the website, please take some time to visit the supporters. Those are the people that help to make this show and others possible. Rich and I would also like to hear from you. So I know that there's a number of listeners that we run into from time to time and tell us that they are listening, but it'd be great to hear from you more regularly. So please reach out to us. Let us know what you like and what you want to hear more of, and we'll be sure to take care of it and talk about it for you. As well as we are always looking for people who are interested in being part of the show. So that'll be it for today on A State of Control.